This is the Literary License Podcast, coming at you from Collingwood, Maine, discussing strange goings-on in the world of the Collins family, with your hosts, Tom Damon, Vicky Ray, and Keith Chorgo, bring you daytime drama fear from the past into your present.
My name is Victoria Winters. In the past week, 3 attempts have been made on my life by an unknown assassin, a man who has already killed once. I have just learnt that man's identity.
I shouldn't have told you. It was a mistake. You know I killed Malloy.
I don't know that. I don't know anything.
If I let you go, you'll go straight to the sheriff. You'll tell him that.
No, I won't. I promise.
I don't believe your promise.
I don't want to hurt you. I just want to get out of here. I'll forget everything.
You can't forget.
Oh, yes, I can.
You know the truth. You're the only one who does.
But I won't tell. I swear I won't.
I might believe that if
If?
if you were dead.
Smile at me. I felt the heat that enveloped me, and what I saw I liked to see. I never knew where evil grew. I should have steered away from you. My friend told me to keep clear of you, but something drew me near to you. I never knew where evil grew. Evil grows in the dark, where the sun it never shines. Evil grows in cracks and holes and lives in people's minds. Evil grew, it's part of you, and now it seems to be that every time I look at you, evil grows in me. If I could build a wall around you, I could control the thing that you do, but I couldn't kill the will within you, and it never shows the place where evil grows. Evil grows in the dark, where the sun it never shines. Evil grows in cracks and holes and lives in people's minds. Evil grew, it's part of you, and now it seems to be that every time I look at you, evil grows in me.
Killed a dog.
What dog?
That dog, he was old. Killed him to put him out of his misery.
Well, there's a great deal of difference between killing a dog and killing a human being.
He didn't suffer, not for a minute. I saw to that. He didn't know what happened to him.
How did you kill him?
I broke his neck. 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 I broke his neck.
Hello, welcome to Literary License Podcast, and today we're doing Dark Shadows, episodes 92 to 113. And before we get started, let's find out who's with us. And today we have our regular co-host. We have Tom Diamond. Hello, Tom.
Hello, Keith, and hello, everybody. Hope everybody is great and doing well.
And we also have Vicky Ray. Hello, Vicky.
Hi, guys.
And you have myself, Keith Shago. So before we get anywhere further into our Dark Shadows, episodes 92 to 113, let's discuss what we've been up to. So, Vicky, what have you been up to since last time we spoke to you?
Oh, a lot of family stuff. Just getting ready to go to Tulsa. My grandson's racing in the Race of Champions, and it's the biggest national race we have. And other than that, I've been started to watch the new dynasties, and I'm getting a really kick out of them. I started watching those yesterday. But other than that, not a whole lot. Just trying to keep up with you guys and get through the new silly season as it is upon us this coming week. So I hope everybody stays sane out there for the holidays. Truce with your families. Love everybody.
What about yourself, Tom? What have you been up to since last time we spoke to you?
Family stuff also, and my fiance and I are planning to move to new digs at the end of January. So that will be a project. And also, just a couple of things very briefly. I saw Dr. Sleep, which is currently playing in the theaters.
I did not see that yet. Did you like it?
Okay, well, here's a couple of things. 2.5 hours. And so you have to be able to sit through a movie like that. Yep. The second half of the movie is definitely good, sequel to The Shining. And I think there's a lot of good stuff for people who remember, including a Jack Nicholson lookalike. I don't want to give too many spoilers away. The first half of the movie is a little slower, but it's a psychic vampire plot. The gal who plays something the Hat, I forget the lady, she is a great scream queen, and if she isn't one already, she will be.
Is this a direct takeoff of The Shining?
It's a sequel. It's a sequel. Stephen King wrote the novel. talks about Danny Torrance as a young man who is now involved in new hijinks and capers and some new characters in it. Definitely worth seeing. The other thing is The Man in the High Castle, which just premiered its last season and on Amazon, and it is fantastic. I am sorry that is going off the air. They've had 4 seasons. I think the first 2 seasons were great. The third season went into a couple of off topics that kind of detracted from things. I hope that didn't have anything to do with the cancellation, but definitely worth seeing.
Amazon's got a lot of good stuff on this month, actually, I should say.
Absolutely.
What about you, Keith?
And myself, okay, I've been watching a lot of Netflix at the moment, so watching that stuff. Finished American Horror Story, which I think we talked about last week.
Yeah, I liked the ending. I really did like it. I even rewatched it yesterday because I liked the end of it, how they tied it all up. I didn't see how that it had anything to do with the other ones. You know, they've been trying to tie in, like, you know, the hotel one and Asylum and Coven. I didn't see any tie-ins with this at all. It seemed like a totally separate entity.
If you go on to Sinister Cinema, you'll find out where the tie-ins are.
Really?
On YouTube.
So there is a tie-in. Okay.
Yeah, there are tie-ins apparently. I haven't watched it yet, but apparently there are. And then I just finished up Swamp Thing on Amazon Prime, which was fantastic.
I keep meaning to start that. I have not started it yet. That's what I'm going to watch.
Excellent series. And I've also finished up, what else? Oh, also on Shudder. Make sure you can get your Shudder in for www.shudder.com and watch Creepshow, which is a very good nod to the 1980s 2 movies that were done by Stephen King and George Romero. One of the stories does have, they're a little bit uneven, but overall they're good. Anytime you have an anthology, they are a bit uneven. Twilight Zone was always uneven.
Shudder's picked up a lot of new stuff lately. I remember they were just kind of limiting themselves, but there's all kinds of good shit on there now.
And now with the horror festivals in full swing, we'll probably be seeing a lot more new content with them. And also on Amazon Prime, I've been watching Dark Shadows, of course, for all people out there. If you are trying to get into Dark Shadows, make sure you get Amazon Prime, because Dark Shadows is probably the best place to watch them at the moment.
Yeah, they got them all.
So besides that, not much. And then I went to, looking to get a new sofa at IKEA. So that's pretty much it. So that would know address to go forward, let's find out what we're in our Out of the Shadows part of the podcast with Tom Diamond, letting us know about trivia from the episodes that we've just watched.
Well, okay. Well, first of all, just to all the fans that have been watching on Amazon Prime, as well as the DVDs. So the episode block, even though it says 92 to 113, there were actually 2 episodes that were preempted, 109 and 110, and that was due to the fact that back in 1966, over the Thanksgiving holiday, the Dark Shadows cast all decided to have Bloody Turkey on that Thursday and Friday, and there was no production on that day. So you're just a technical thing. You're going to see 108 through 110. That's considered one episode on Amazon Prime. So we're actually reviewing 19 episodes instead of 21 because of that schedule. Getting now, as far as new people, new actors on Dark Shadows, we have a few. Hugh Franklin comes on as Richard Garner, the lawyers, the father and son Garner team. And Hugh Franklin, of course, went on to All My Children for 13 years as Dr. Tyler. A very distinguished actor, and I think he plays very well against Joan Bennett, as a matter of fact. And Conrad Fawkes, and I used to thought he was Conrad, but it's Conard, folks. I don't want to say Canard because that sounds kind of.
That's what I was saying.
That's like the poor guy.
Conrad Fox.
You said it, I did it. Woo! He passed away. May rest in peace. Kennard passed away in 2009. Has been to a couple of Dark Shadows conventions, and you can actually see he did a couple of interviews on YouTube for that. So he played Frank Garner, the normal love interest of Vicky. Probably one of the most healthy relationships she'll ever have on the show, for as long as it lasts.
Literally.
Yeah, absolutely. And then James Blair, the character of James Blair, the financial wizard who helps Burke Devlin out, is played by John Barragay. John Barragay was a very prolific actor, believe it or not, in the 50s and 60s, who just about starred in every TV series, nighttime and other that you could think of. Unfortunately, a lot of them are lost because he was in a lot of the live 1950s productions. But he was a very, very distinguished character actor. And the most interesting one was in episode 99, you have Dolph Sweet. And Dolph Sweet played a character by the name of Ezra Hearn. Once again, you have a little flashback to, what's happening with Burke's efforts to get the Collinsport Cannery people to work for him. Last time we had George Matthews in the last block. This time, Dolph Sweet is Ezra Hearn, who works for the cannery and tells Burke in no uncertain terms, screw you. I'm staying where I am. Dolph Sweet went on to star on a series called Give Me a Break in the 1980s. You may or may
with
not.
Nell Carter.
Correct. That was Dolph Sweet. He played Kaminsky, the cop, who was a widower with 2 kids, and Nell Carter, attempts to bring them up. So that was his main claim to fame. As far as bloopers are concerned, I think they were really concentrating on the technical aspects, but you do see a couple of interesting things in one of the episodes in Carolyn's room. I think that's one of the first times you get to see Carolyn's room. There's like a cameo picture on the wall above her bed, and if you look very closely, you're going to see the teleprompter reflection go through the cameo. It goes through very fast at one point, but then in the same scene later on, as the camera's shifting, you see the teleprompter move slowly. It looks like a white light. It's probably, I don't know whether it's attached to the camera or not. There's another, of course. Why is it called Dark Shadows? Now I know, because this is the only it's the only time in a lighted room that you can actually see the shadows of people when they talk to each other due to improper lighting. So to me, that that's another. You'll never see that anywhere else. I also call the first episode 92 the soap opera episode, because that's the only episode that's all banger sets, and it's usually it's the hotel, it's the coffee shop, it's nothing spooky about it. So it's an interesting change. And finally, if you look close in one of the episodes where Vicky's in the drawing room, and you get a shot of the door to Collingwood. You'll see the camera very briefly. It looks like a cyclops actually, as she turns, and you see actually the big camera, and then the camera turns away again. So those are the sidelights and gist of what we have in this block.
And so this brings us to our synopsis. So, Vicky, do you want to give us our Into the Shadows side of the synopsis of Dark Shadows, episodes 92 to 113?
Don't shoot the messenger.
Here we go.
Vicky visits the family lawyers and finds no answers outside of Frank, who is more than interested in her family tree. Vicky discovers Burke's business associate using the same pen that she found on Widow's Hill, leading Vicky to refuse a ride home with Burke, as he may be a killer. And that was really kind of funny because she was afraid of him. She calls Roger, who comes to bang her, to pick her up. But on the way, I know.
There we go.
To pick her up, but on the way home, after some mysterious talking, gets stuck in a storm in an unused cabin. The sheriff shows up and leads them back to Collingwood. Meanwhile, Carolyn is still moping about Burke and green with envy whilst receiving some comfort from her mother. Upon her return, she tells Carolyn that Burke is not to be trusted, and then shares her suspicion with Maggie, who decides to drop by calling at Collingwood. Go figure. Mrs. Johnson keeps her ear to the ground, reports back to Burke. Nancy, Victoria Winters, Drews, starts investigating Pengate, and realizes that Roger was the last person with a pen. I didn't even notice the Pengate thing till I just... Vicky almost gets run over by a car, suspecting Roger, especially as Roger reveals more than he should about Bill Malloy. Roger admits to Elizabeth that Victoria is dangerous. Roger tampers with evidence and then gets caught by the sheriff. Through the chaos of Collinswood, Burke and Carolyn cuddle up closer. Joe and Maggie get one step closer, and Sam is still on the drink. Roger goes to the slammer. Victoria almost gets hit by an urn and runs to the cottage to make a phone call about it. Matthew catches her and admits to murdering Bill Malloy, although it's more involuntary manslaughter than first degree. And after realizing that involuntary manslaughter would be better if he murders Vicky along with this, and considering that Vicky will no longer play any more reindeer games, it was Matthew who dropped the urn and sped the car. Everybody wants to kill Victoria this whole episode. Frank shows up and starts to look for Vicky with no hope. Elizabeth puts two and two together and comes to the cottage and shows up to save Vicky in the nick of time. Matthew confesses to Elizabeth and runs off into the night. Elizabeth takes a distraught Vicky to the house. She's always distraught. Roger gets released and realizes that Vicky could have died. He couldn't care less. Frank takes the close to the death. Vicky takes the death. I got tied up. Frank takes the death of Vicky out to dinner and then decides that it would be good for a weekend to Bangor. I'm trying to say it right. It sounds terrible. It seems everybody wants to take Vicky to Bangor. Everyone thinks Matthew has run out of town in a station wagon, but he's hiding in the old house with David promises to help get him by. And that these episodes, everybody's trying to kill Vicky, and they are trying to take her to Bangor. But that's Bangor, Maine, Keith.
So let's go to our shedding some light part of the podcast. So, Tom, what are your thoughts about these episodes?
Well, and once again, Vicky, we're not going to shoot the messenger, but the Bangor saga continues.
Yeah.
In episode 99, Vicky says, I was going to go. she was going to go to bang her anyway, and he found me a lift. So is Bert giving Vicky a lift as well as banging her? One never knows. And then in episode 97, I really liked that. Vicky, didn't Carolyn tell you about it when she and I were in a coffee shop? We were waiting for Bert, who said he was going to bang her on business. So Burke is banging someone else on business, and then she says, "It would have been silly to take the bus." Well, of course, if she's going to get banged, why should she take the bus when she can get banged? So that's. So I think I think that the main emphasis obviously is now going back, in my opinion, to the whodunits with a little bit of a sprinkling of the supernatural. I do love the exterior shots once again, and Josette coming out of the painting, just to remind us of that little thing. We have Mrs. Johnson's first day, which is at the job, which is kind of memorable. But I really think that the episodes fall asleep for a little while, but pick up when we finally get to the real murderer of Bill Malloy, Matthew Morgan. And this is a real spotlight, in my opinion, for Thayer David, who really, and to be fair, also
did an awesome job.
Oh, absolutely. With Alexandra Mulkey as Vicky. And you can see the tension between them when she comes to the cottage looking, and then he confesses everything to her.
Tell you one thing, I would have been a whole lot faster than her trying to get out that door, though, when she's trying to get away from him. I mean, I would be booking. That was that little interloping thing. It's like, what is that? Actually run and open the door.
Well, see, my biggest thing about the whole thing is that Thayer David's eyebrows need their own special.
Oh my God, I know.
they're like two caterpillars above his eyes, and it's like, and at some point, it's because he is a brilliant actor, and kudos to his acting. Great. But at one point, his eyebrows are going in different directions from each other as he's going madder and madder, and you're thinking. But then my question also about his character is: he supposed to be kind of special needs?
That's how I was just going to ask. Is he a little slow?
It was never specifically delineated, but you do get that impression that he was really taken care of by the family for most of his life, and
he's very loyal.
That's the whole basis of the plot. It's because of his misguided loyalty to Liz that this takes on a projection of he's got to be the white knight and he's going to kill anybody, or tell people to get out of the way or else. But you do see he's got a conscience. He's got a guilty conscience.
He's got a very guilty conscience.
Yes, and he's always, I want to do it, but I don't really want to kill you, Vicky, but I think I must. That kind of thing.
Making me. He kept saying, "You're going to make me," and he's like, "I don't want to, but I'm going to have to."
I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it unless I have to. But if I have to, I will. And this is, and the same. He just wants everybody to keep away from Liz. Who knows? Maybe he has a real crush on Liz. I don't know.
That's what I was thinking.
Maybe there's a mother.
I think. Yeah. Well, there is that backstory that we do find out in the earlier episodes, is that he has a daughter who goes away. So we never find out that storyline, but when Vicky first comes in, he's acting he doesn't trust Vicky at all. This is way back when we had the old version, the other actor.
She was a big snoop, let's face it. She wasn't sticking around all the time.
Yeah, but what we got in this story is that he had a daughter who went off and unknown circumstances.
Right.
He kind of was at the end, like in a really low point of his life, and Elizabeth's daughter brought him to the place, and then at that time she made sure that he was housed, clothed, and kept busy, and gave him a job, but at the same time giving him like a kind of a built-in family, because they kind of accepted him as family, even though he's hired help. He is part of the family in a weird way.
Right.
and he thought he was part of the family. So I guess that brings us, so I guess if you become destitute and you're lonely and you got no one else in your life, and someone does bring you into their life, I guess there would be that, when no one else is there for you, and this one person, who does everything for you and provides you home, shelter, and food, and a purpose in life, I guess it does make a lot of sense that he would feel this way.
Right.
I don't know if it's love, but I guess it would be like a family member.
Dependence, I would think. And remember also he has
a purpose. She gives him a purpose in life.
Right. Remember also he has a brother, Walter, in Clearwater, and that's where when he escapes from when he escapes from the cottage after Liz confronts him, he's going to the brother in Clearwater, and I have no idea why that plot completely dropped, because all of a sudden he's back at the old house again, hiding. So that's
well, I think that was isn't that a bit like Cloak and Dagger sort of thing? It's like the police basically see this, because basically he drives a station wagon, which I would think that he would drive a pickup, but he drives a station wagon. So all I can think of is like the Brady Bunch station wagon, and zooming right away on that. But so they find this station wagon. Apparently, they find that zooming out of town towards his brother's house. But he doesn't. I don't know if this is a mess up with the writers, or this is supposed to be quite clever. But then he finds himself back at the old house.
I think it's a mess up with the writers, quite frankly.
Yeah. And I think it's like bait and switch sort of thing. I think they were looking for a bait and switch situation, but they didn't really explain it very well to give it the full impact of what they're looking for. Because it does makes sense that he would go back to the old house, because that's the only life he ever knows. And he can hide there. I mean, there's a lot of land there, and there's a lot of buildings you can hide out in. So it does make sense that he would go, that he probably would go back there. A lot more than his brother, because, let's face it, since the beginning of the series, we didn't know anything about the brother until he goes rushing out, and all of a sudden there's a brother. And but then obviously, never we know so far, I don't think they're very close.
We never know what happened to him. By the way, I'm glad you mentioned writer, because this is the first appearance of Ron Sprout, who started to write the episodes in addition to the team of Wallace and Francis Swan. And Ron Sprout was a very influential writer throughout a number of the episodes, and who was actually instrumental in getting He Who Shall Not Be Named, Jonathan Frid onto Dark Shadows, as they were both friends in Yale, and Ron Sprout was able to get him an audition for the show. And that the addition of the extra writer may also have some influence in terms of what's happening.
You got David also that is taking care of him. David's feeding him while he's hiding in the old house.
That's at the end.
Yeah, that's
at the end.
Yeah, that was a bit odd, I think, with that decision there with David, because you never felt that David and him were that close. And because every time he sees David, but it's a bit weird also. Let's just because there is another subplot that going, leaving this part of it now and going looking at the David character. Now the thing is, he puts two and two together that Mrs. Johnson and Bert are actually a lot closer than what they are.
Right.
But what I think cues him off about that? Now, up until this point, everyone calls David David. So don't worry about David. Oh, David's just impressionable. David this, David that, David that. And the only one that calls David something else is Bert, and he calls him Davy.
Yeah.
And then Mrs. Johnson calls him Davy.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, this makes sense. But then what we get here, and then once we get back to Thayer David's character, and all of a sudden he starts calling David Davy, which was a bit odd. It's almost like, so it makes sense that Mrs. Johnson and Burke would call him Davy, because Mrs. Johnson knows David through Burke, really, because they don't really have any interconnection. And that's how David's able to put together. But then it seemed funny that he always called David all the way through until Burke and Mrs. Johnson calls him Davy. And then all of a sudden he starts calling David Davy. It's like, oh, okay, this is a bit odd.
It reminds me of Davy and Goliath. So I don't always like the Davy.
Didn't he actually see her leaving the hotel, the only hotel David did? And that kind of tipped him off too.
Yeah, but I also think but I also think the fact that up at that point, everyone's calling him David, and Burke's the only one that calls him Davy. And when Mrs. Johnson does show up, she starts calling him Davy from the set go. For as soon as she says David, she calls him Davy all the way through, and it's like, oh, okay. So for me, I thought that's how David's able to put together that actually they're a lot closer than because how do you? I'm not friends with Burke. I'm not friends with Burke at all. It's like, yes, you are, sort of thing. And I thought maybe that's how David clued in on it, because no one up at that point calls him Davy.
It could have also been a writer's plot because remember, there's this collusion going on between Mrs. Johnson and Burke. Mm-hmm. And Mrs. Johnson is there to find out all the dirt. And even after it's revealed that Roger did not kill Bill Malloy, which is most of the stuff that's going on in this block until we find out about Matthew. Even after that, Burke is still saying, well, stay on, Mrs. Johnson. We want you to find out what's going on and Mrs. Johnson, I still think Roger killed Bill Malloy. I still think she's like very, very, she's very, very stubborn. And he desperately, and Burke finally gives it up. I mean, realizes, well, he's shocked at the idea of Matthew doing it, but he's still hoping that he can get them all anyway, because Burke still has that chip on his shoulder from 10 years ago. But in answer to but getting back to what we were talking about, I do think that that's probably a familiarity thing. Burke and David, they want to establish that familiarity between the two. She's going to call him by his nickname. Same thing, Mrs. Johnson. Maybe they had something in mind at the time for Mrs. Johnson and David for them to get kind of closer. But of course, that's speculation.
See, I thought it was more about simple fact to give David a clue that because remember even Mrs. Stoddard she introduces Mrs. Johnson to David as David, and said before no one else calls him David, and she starts calling him Davy. So for me, I thought maybe that's how David put everything together. So I thought, but maybe maybe I'm just giving the writers more credit. Maybe I should.
Well, he did that with also that he started figuring it out too when he sees her leaving from there. David's mind is always working in these episodes. That kid is just he just got his little brain is just going all the time about something. They
still got him a bit of an asshole though. He's still got that thing going, which I'm happy to say that. Because for our fans out there, we're doing another Dark Shadows next week. And then, of course, we're doing the December one. And unfortunately, because during Christmas, we're actually tripling up on our episodes. So without giving anything away, it's good. We get to see David start to change. And I think it's going to be a welcome concern, which we'll talk about in our next episode, which is quite good. I think that we need to mention Mrs. Johnson's eavesdropping skills. I mean, how one woman can sit there and polish that candlestick for like 15 minutes while Vicky and Caroline are having a conversation.
She's just not there.
I really actually like her character. I think she kind of gives it some subtle, humor for certain, but for me anyway, I can't really speak for everybody listening. But she kind of cracks me up.
I like her. You know what I like about her is because you got the Collins family, and even though Vicky's not part of the Collins family, they have this kind of like way that they voice things and the way that they view things. And then they'll be like trying to do everything kind of subtle, to say things very subtly. And then Mrs. Johnson goes, "God, do you see that?" And I said, his throat was cut, and not she has this gruffness to her, and she always says stuff that Mrs. Johnson. And then you always got Elizabeth Stoddard going, "Oh, Mrs. Johnson, I wish you wouldn't phrase it that way."
well, she gets even better. Mrs. Johnson gets even better, and I don't want to give away spoilers either, but Clarice Blackburn really kind of hones in the role to this, land sakes, what's going on with everybody? And did you finish that sandwich yet, David? That kind of thing. And but I was I was just thinking also that the relationship between, Mrs. Johnson's eavesdropping skills are matched by David's own eavesdropping skills. If you think of it,
David's the king for sure.
Oh yeah.
But at least David's behind a closed door. Mrs. Johnson's like pretty much like, she's pretty much like in between the two of them with her ear out.
But he was caught in this block. Who caught him? Vicky caught him, or Carolyn caught him?
Who hasn't caught him?
And she's shaking him. Where are you, you little monster? What are you? I hate you.
Carolyn caught him.
Carolyn caught him, right. Where are you? I hate you. I hate you. What are you doing? I'm not doing anything. Well, what are you doing? Who are you listening to? I wasn't listening. And he's lying and trying to dance his way out of it. It's really hysterical.
I think this whole pen thing, though.
Oh God!
I think that kind of went on. That went on a little bit longer than it should have. I agree with that. Kind of like
it was getting kind of convoluted for me. That's why I was like, every time I start losing track, I'll text you or one of you both or whatever, because I was getting lost with the pen, and then apparently that ultimately leads to Roger hiding the pen.
Answer a question for me. How is it that he's going to hide the pen at the very spot where the guy is murdered? Why, if he's going to hide a pen somewhere, why can't he just hide it anywhere else where nobody's going to think of it? But he's got to hide it. He's got to hide the pen. He's got to hide the pen right where Malloy is murdered, and that, of course, leads to a great scene where Burke and who was it? Was it Sheriff Patterson? Follow Roger. Because Burke comes out with a duplicate pen, and Roger can't understand it. And there is a nice build-up to Roger. And that's really that's one of the. That leads to a very interesting segment of the block where Roger's arrested, or at least being held for questioning. And then there's this great stuff with Dana Elcar bringing everybody in, including Sam, who says, "Leave me alone twice in one day. What do you want out of me?" That kind of thing. Poor Sam. But again, there's it's kind of stupid. Isn't it kind of stupid that he decided to hide the pen, the one place that he'd be incriminated?
Well, they set him up too.
Another thing is like, okay, if I murder someone and the only thing that's keeping me from being convicted is this pen. Now Roger goes on business trips. Why don't you just drive down the road and just throw it out?
That's right. That's right.
Why bury it?
Or put it in the nearest. Put it in a garbage pail. Drive out to the next town.
Yeah, put it in the garbage or something.
Or give it to somebody. Give it to a new girlfriend or something like. I don't know. Give it to. That would have been funny.
I mean, if it was a Mont Blanc pen, I could understand. But I was like, it's like I get these specially made. It's like I only got 6 of these specially made pens. You're like, really, really, Burke? Now I have to sit there. I think we need to talk about Burke a little bit. Mm-hmm. Burke is kind of conniving and kind of mean and horrible.
Yeah, he is.
The way, like, if he doesn't get his way, he's like a child pushing his toys out of the prom.
That's why I didn't like him last time. Because the last block we were discussing, who was the character you hated the most. And Burke just wants all the marbles. He's obsessed. If he can't get this, damn, now I have to get that. And he's manipulating all over the place. And of course, Carolyn is falling for the whole thing again. Oh, he likes me. He wants to take me out to dinner. And there's that whole. I called one episode. I called it the 3 couples episode because you had the Blue Whale. You had Burke and Carolyn, and then you had Maggie and the father walk in, and I forget whether Joe was involved, but I mean, you do have that, but this is all going on basically because of Burke. Burke is just, and Liz even says to Roger, after this whole thing is cleared up, well, watch out for Burke. Even if he knows that Roger didn't murder Malloy, he's still going to go after us. And that's part of his meanness.
Well, wasn't he starting his proceedings to start buying the cannery? in the next town over.
It's being held up. That's the plot device. The cannery wants more. The cannery doesn't want a sign yet. Logansport. They don't want a sign yet.
That's
They're
right.
holding out for more. And this is frustrating him to no end, which is what that scene between him and Blair, James Blair, played by Barragate, is all about.
Yeah,
Now, do we
okay.
think-
That straightens it out.
I think one thing that's quite interesting does come out in these episodes. I wonder if the Collins family is as prosperous as we think they are.
Well, I'm not thinking at this time that they are, because she's always because Roger says several times that he says if he buys that cannery, he's going to put us out of business. And,
but it's not just that. There's another thing, a simple fact that is like, here we do get like a little nod to a simple fact that business is not as good as we thought. That, when the series starts, we think, okay, there's this big conglomerate Mogul family sort of thing, and there's money. They're rich. Even though they have closed off most of the house and sort of thing, but we're kind of tended towards that might have to do with Elizabeth, her trauma from 10 years ago. But this time around, there's like, we find out when Burke's doing, going after the businesses and stuff like this, we find out that they're not as lucrative as we think they are, which is quite interesting. Well, then again, how big was salmon and stuff like that? I mean, it might be one of those businesses that, it might have been great in the 1800s, but might not be so good in 1960,
when you're thinking cannery, you're probably thinking all kinds of shellfish and tuna and stuff like that. And
yeah, I think they just see shrimp, don't they?
I don't know, Tom. What do you know anything about that?
Sardines.
Sardines.
Yeah.
They use sardines.
I don't like sardines, so they go out of business very quickly if they can their customer. I wanted to mention what did I want to mention? I'll remember it. Go ahead, Keith. Go ahead.
I have to sit there and say though, we're still kind of stuck with the Carolyn character a little bit, and it seems like there's a lot of people that are revolving. We're seeing a lot of people revolving, and outside the fantastic scene between Carolyn and her mother, when she's playing, the victim, because that's pretty much what we get. I'm either hot and horny or I'm the victim, so she's one or the other at the moment. So she's back home playing the victim, and I like the scene that we get between Carolyn and Elizabeth's daughter. And I thought that was really, really well done, and it was quite like a nice kind of acting that's going on to him. It was well written, and about the mother understanding the daughter, but yet being firm with her. And I thought that was really well done. But I can't wait until we get to a Carolyn that's not so fruity. That's
right. Yeah.
One way or the other. I would like to have a more three-dimensional character, because at the moment we still don't have a Carolyn that's three-dimensional. It's either Burke,
yeah.
or I hate my family because they're keeping me away from Burke, or it's I want to be with Burke, no Joe, yes Joe, no Joe, I want to be with Burke,
Or
oh my
Joe.
God, I hate my family because they keep me away from Burke.
Think of Joe through all this. Joe's like yesterday's shoe leather half the time.
Well, but the thing is, we do get Joe. We're getting Joe with a little bit of guts. I mean, next episode we'll go a bit more further into this, but we can see that Joe's pretty much had enough now, which is good. We're starting to get a bit of backbone with Joe that we didn't get before. He's not Carolyn's bitch boy anymore. He's all of a sudden like sitting back and going, "I'm having enough." So we're getting to that point where we're starting to get to that point. So
also,
it's quite nice to see him change.
Also, what you had spoken about, remember that, and this is part of the nice scenes between Liz and Carolyn, where Liz tells her about Ned Calder. Ned Calder being the other man that Liz would have ended up with if it hadn't been for Paul Stoddard. And she was dangling Ned Calder on a string, the same way Carolyn is dangling Joe on a string. And Liz is trying to warn her. Now, don't let this happen to you. And I think that that's kind of maybe part of what you're talking about, Keith.
I think so. Yeah.
It establishes it establishes that they really do love each other. And that's the tragedy of it. To be surrounded with all this suspicion and innuendo, but down deep, Liz really wants the best for her, however misguided in certain areas it may be, and Carolyn does not want her mother hurt. And
another thing that we get here as well, this is really good, that finally someone says it. Elizabeth goes, "He's too old for you." Finally. You know what I mean? We don't get that.
How old is Burke's character supposed
He's got
to
to
be?
He's got to be the same
40s?
age as Roger. He's got to be the same age as Roger.
yeah, I would think. Yeah.
They were friends, same age as Sam. Sam, Burke, and Roger hung around together since they were kids. They have to be around the same age.
That's right.
Too, though. That's why I'm just saying.
Nah, I don't know. I mean, the thing
in terms of being a boy, a young man that, you know.
Well, no, Mrs. Johnson says that he was a boy, but Roger and Sam don't discuss him as being a boy. He was a friend.
Yeah.
So,
sounds like a bit of a hellion back 10 years ago, I guess.
Well, to be honest, I mean, I guess you could see it happening. I mean, obviously he had a drink problem. So if he's even that drunk and he can't remember if he drove a car or not, obviously he blacks out.
Didn't he say he remembered he didn't drive the car, though?
Yeah, well, he didn't, it changed, and he wasn't quite sure. Now he's sure that it wasn't, and that storyline is still panning itself out there. But the same thing is simple fact that but we do have that Burke and Laura and Roger and Sam are apparently around the same age, give or take 5 years from each one of them. They're around the same age. So Carolyn basically going out with Burke, she's kind of going out with her uncle.
Right.
So Carolyn has father issues, let's face it. I mean,
yeah, she does.
She got daddy issues.
And
I know that Burke's
Johnson. Another thing about Mrs. Johnson, her character is like she has the capacity to know that there are other things that go on that can't be explained. And she's the only open-minded one that says, well, there's some shit going down around here. And, you can't really explain it and stuff like that. So I like that about Mrs. Johnson, though, too.
But to go back to one of our early podcast episodes when we covered one of the early ones, you got to remember that when Carolyn showed up in Bangor with and Burke was there, and then Carolyn comes over and sits with Burke. What does he order Carolyn? A Coke and a hamburger. Like that's we're gonna give you something off the children's menu. So that tells you what Burke thinks. Well, that tells you what Burke thinks of Carolyn. And the thing is that it's ironic, but at the same time, you think that anyone that would have been clued up on this, and Carolyn just thought back a little bit to even have him say that, it means that he doesn't see her as a woman; he sees her as a plaything or a little girl. And now here we go. Is that and another thing is like, here he's supposed to have dinner with Carolyn. We're going to spend the day together. Da da da. Okay, well, Vicky's going to Bangor, sort of thing. Oh my God, Vicky going to Bangor? I'll take you, and drops Carolyn. Which is quite interesting because that's what Carolyn does to Joe all the bloody time. So that makes it quite interesting.
But I think it's also ironic because Mitchell Ryan, God bless him, who's 93 and still alive, and of course it is well known in the fandom that he had an alcoholic problem while he was on the show. And I think it's ironic that he's playing a character also who's got an alcoholic abuse problem. And one kind of wonders how he was able to put some of his own some of the stuff that was going on in real life into that character, and maybe the anger, I'm speculating, but maybe the anger associated with that was probably what made Burke a more dynamic individual, because Burke really had his devils at the same time that the actor had his devils, and it was accidental. And by the way, the cast, and the cast was very supportive, from what I understand, of his issue. They all knew about it, and that's another story for another time. But it was really, really a bonding between them. They all tried, and they wanted to help him out. But anyway, that's my point.
But you have to think of yourself in the time, though. I mean, everybody's smoking cigarettes. I know it's because they had, the ads for cigarettes back in the day. But I mean, it's just like, you don't see that. See, I watch regular soap. I still watch my General Hospital, my Young and the Restless. I can turn it on, figure out what's going on, even if I missed it for 2 weeks. But you don't see the alcohol, and God forbid you see a cigarette on a soap opera in our present day. I mean, it's fun to watch, how different things were in the United States back then.
Well,
What was acceptable.
Our next episode, we'll talk about Elizabeth Stoddard's pharmaceutical cabinet that she seems to have.
I know, she always got. But, she comes out with her little teaspoon, got her teaspoon with her little pills in there, and she's always seeming to dose Victoria, because Victoria's always, I think you need to take this and lie down. She's always got something.
Well, especially after Matthew kidnapped her, and she drags her back to Collingwood. Now here's that. Oh, I don't want to take this. I don't want to take this, Mr. Tyler. Now you'll be fine. It works for me. That kind of thing.
Yeah. I think another character that we need to see is the evolution of Vicky Winters. Now, I'm calling her Nancy Drew Winters because she's doing a lot of investigating like Nancy Drew here. But we are starting to see her come a little bit more into her own. She's becoming a bit more stronger. Even though she's becoming the victim, there's a strongness about her being in her victimhood that we're getting, which next episode we'll go into more. Of course, we're going to see this character change even more. But it's good to see that this character, all of a sudden, there's brains in here. We got something working behind the eyes. She's not just whining and stuff like this. There's a lot going on, and she's putting things together, and we're actually seeing the evolution of Vicky Winters. And it's taken us up to 100 episodes to do this, but it's interesting to see this character start to evolve, and I quite like this now.
Well, I have to remind you guys that I think that originally, and especially from the Shadows on the Wall thing, I think she was envisioned as the strong ingenue main lead, which was the way she started off with. So she started off as a smart person with a lot. But then, as I mentioned last time, when David locked her in the room, that started to change everything, and all the fears and the doubts and the insecurities started to creep in. And for the first time, you start to hear her say, "I don't understand," but she's not the only one. Every character in that series at some time or other will say, "I don't understand what's wrong." It's kind of like that "I don't understand" disease. But she is. I think she's battling between all the stuff that she's been going through with the kidnapping and
so much is happening to her all the time, nonstop.
Let's remember, Matthew tried to drop a piece of statue on her.
Yeah.
A piece of statue on her.
Tries to run her over.
Tries to run her over with a car. Is it any wonder? I mean, this gal's under a lot of stress. I mean, she definitely in therapy. Therapy is definitely.
Do you think? On my way home, because I knew we were doing the podcast, I was thinking about this. Do you think that before she shows up, do you think Collingwood was just this like really peaceful town, and she's like the catalyst of everything?
Yeah, it's like when she hits town. Bert Devlin's hitting town at the same time that Victoria Winters is hitting town.
Yeah,
so
but at the same time, not much is happening with Burke. He seems to be reacting to everything, but it seems like everything's happened to Vicky. It seems like the ghost appeared to Vicky. Because she sees Josette and the last set of plots, didn't he?
Yeah, that's Matthew's big gripe, though.
No. She didn't see Josette, but she saw Bill Malloy, didn't she?
She does. Bill Malloy. Okay, that's wait. Are we? Wait, I'm getting confused. Did I get ahead of myself?
Yeah, I'm so far ahead now. I'm trying to figure out where the cutoff date is.
I remember where we are. Yeah, she sees Bill Malloy, and that's the only ghost she's seen so far.
Okay, Josette comes later.
But she does hear crying at one point in the early episodes.
Yes.
And it doesn't seem like any.
So does Mrs. Johnson. Well. Mrs. Johnson hears the crying, and that's the first time, and that's when that's when you get that Bert Devlin, "This house is haunted," and Burke is like, "What do you mean? What do you mean haunted?" And then Bert says, "Oh, come on, when we were kids," but then she hears that in the locked room in the basement. What's that about? I wanted to touch upon the Betty Hanscom picture, which in this block of episodes, Sam gives to Vicky and says, "Okay, you can keep it." And it does look like a continuity glitch because back in episode 60, it appears that when they're first talking about her, Sam says, "Well, this happened 25 years ago." Now, if that's the case, how could Betty Hanscom have been Vicky's mother?
Right.
If she dies, if this thing happened 25 years ago, and then the woman dies a year later, that's 4 years before Vicky was born.
But then there's a B. Hanscom that's working at Collingswood up until
the father. The father.
Oh, is that the father? Okay.
The butler. Actually, it says that either it's the daughter or the niece. You don't pin that down in this block, but definitely that was Hanscom was the butler at Collingwood who left. So there's the relationship there.
I mean, another thing though, because I was thinking that because when Sam does say about Betty Hanscom died, but he's kind of like flippant about it, like he doesn't want to cover this, but at the same time, I always thought that the reason why he might have been flippant and didn't want to go into too much detail here because they killed Hanscom. They killed a Hanscom on the road. That's the victim that they're talking about, the hit and run.
The hit and run.
It's somebody named Hanscom. They don't say his first name, but his surname was Hanscom.
But did they say whether it was male or female? Did they allude to that? Because I can't remember.
I don't think so.
They don't really say. I'm assuming it's male. I don't know why. I'm thinking that the Hanscom that they hit on the side of the road, Laura, Burke, and I'm not sure if Sam was in the car or not, but Roger, because I'm not quite sure. I'm still a bit shady where Sam actually is. I don't know if Sam was in the car or Sam was walking down the road or Sam. I don't know. It's a bit shady where Sam was. We know that Laura, Burke, and Roger were in the car. We're just not quite sure where the hell Sam was. Maybe he was on top. Maybe he was riding the top of the car.
No, that comes.
Maybe he was riding on the hood. Yay! I don't know.
But of course, there was a lot of alcohol involved. So
so we're not quite sure where Sam was.
Did Sam see it happen? I thought Sam saw the episode. I'm blanking out.
I'm not sure. I know that Sam ended up being a witness for Roger.
To
go against Burke.
I think he saw the accident happen, and then Roger bribed Sam, gave him $15,000, and they covered it up because Sam gave him some paintings.
Yeah,
so it looked like a business sale, and that was to shut Sam up as to what happened. And of course, there's still that dangling participle of the letter that Sam wrote and is in the hotel safe, telling everything, and that's mentioned.
Sam is such a tortured soul. No matter what.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have to figure, did his wife leave him or did she die?
No,
she
left
died.
Him, didn't she? She died. Okay. She died.
So, so she didn't leave Maggie behind. Okay, that's
No.
Didn't quite work out. I was having difficulty remembering exactly what went on because, he does, every once in a while, Maggie's mom does get mentioned slightly, so you're not quite sure what happened there.
I think though there's a kind of it's disappointing in a way because once you find out that when Matthew tries to drop the statue on her, then really that's a giveaway. Then Matthew did everything. I mean, it comes out later that he confesses, but it's almost like I thought they kind of had something really good going when Roger was arrested, and Dana Elcar, of course, continues to do a brilliant job as Sheriff Patterson, and then you got the Garner, the father Garner, Richard Garner, who's a pretty decent. You could see how worried he looked. That was pretty decent, but they were starting to get into, well, what are all the ifs and ands, and is it possible that Roger could have done it, and what's going on here, and I think those were very, very well acted scenes. Then now everything is it's kind of like I think they wanted to resolve this plot line already. They wanted to get rid of it, so they gave it to Matthew as the heavy.
Well, there's also the weird thing with going back to the Betty Hanscom, B. Hanscom, who worked there, all this other stuff that's going on, and then we got Vicky and Frank, and then Frank's father, and then he calls Mrs. Stoddard up and goes, "Don't worry," does this kind of weird thing where it's like, "Don't worry, we're not gonna tell her too much or whatever." So you kind of have this thing. So, but then again, I mean, we'll keep watching, but it's almost kind of like there's these little threads that they kind of throw at you, but they never do anything with, and it just seems like this is part of that.
Do that.
Well, even the writing, though, that they don't pick up. I mean, the thread, for instance, of when she was locked in the room, and at the end, not locked, when they tried to, when the door of the room opened and shut, and she's trying to figure out who that was, and at the end of one episode, she says, "It's got to be somebody that knows this house very well to have been able to open the door." And then the beginning of the next episode, the next thing she says is, "Well, it's somebody probably who doesn't know the house and went in and went out." And you say, well, what the hell is going on there? And actually, Vicky was a lot closer to the truth the first time. But I think it's I don't know whether it was a writer's glitch or whether they were just establishing a contrast.
You know what I think it might be as well is I think that you got to remember that the ratings weren't great. They were doing okay, but the ghost, Josette's ghost comes up, all of a sudden we get a spike in the ratings.
Right.
And I think okay, we got to soothe this up. But I do think that Thanksgiving week, knowing that the kids were off during that week. And if you notice the whole thing about Matthew and the cottage and Victoria and all of a sudden this stuff comes through really fast. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden it's like, do. And I'm wondering it's because this is going to happen during this week. And there's going to be, people are going to be off. They're not going to be going to school or whatever like this. And we know that we can get a good audience because people are going to be watching television because they're not at work and they're not here.
That's a good part.
So I'm wondering if that's why we got that. Because next month we do get another spike where we do get, around the Christmas holidays, which we'll get into next week. So what I think we're going to do is we're going to cut to a commercial break. Well, not a commercial break. We're actually going to cut to an interview with Kathleen Reisch and Marcy Robin.
That's Kathleen Reisch.
Kathleen Reisch. Sorry, Kathleen.
Sorry, Kathleen.
I'm really bad with the English language. I grew up poor. I think my parents didn't do a good job with me when they were speaking. Sorry. But we're gonna cut to their interview, which is the first part of a two-part interview. And if you want to know more about them, they were very interested because they started the Dark Shadows conventions. So we'll be back after their interview. Hello, welcome to Literary License Podcast, and today we'll be speaking to Kathleen Reisch and Marcy Robin. They're co-founders of the Dark Shadows Fan Club. Hello, Kathy.
Hi there.
Hello, Marcy. Doing? I'm doing well.
Hi. Hello. Thanks for having us.
And of course, we have with us Tom Diamond. Unfortunately, Vicky will not be with us today because she's doing a thing called Mother's Day and actually spending time with her kids, which she probably murdered them by the end of today. So we'll see how that one turns out. So, say hello, Tom.
Hi, guys. Great to be here. And welcome, Kathy and Marcy. It's a pleasure to have you here today. The co-founders of the Dark Shadows fandom. And if it weren't for them, Dark Shadows would not be where it is today, in my humble opinion. And we wouldn't be speaking. So now that I've swelled your heads enough, I'm going to turn this back.
Thank you.
So I figured the best way to get started, let's ask the one question that everyone has to ask each other if they're Dark Shadows fans. And we'll start with you, Marcy. How did you first get involved in watching Dark Shadows and becoming a fan?
1968, I was a fan of numerous, singing groups of that period. And one of them was the Association, which is based here in Los Angeles area. And they were going to be on the local Dick Cavett talk show. And my cousin in Florida, who also loved them, was eager to hear about it. But so she told me that they were going to be on the show. So I said, okay, I'll turn it on and watch them. So I'm sitting through the show going, okay, where are they? Where are they? Where are they? And all of a sudden, Dick Cavett calls up this guy from the audience who's wearing this cape and carrying a cane and looking kind of spooky. And it was obviously Jonathan Frid being Barnabas. And they start talking about Dark Shadows. And I've never really been that much into, horror per se, but, I listened to whatever it was. I don't remember now what they said, but I was intrigued. And I remember picking up the TV guide and going, when is that show on? And finding it in the TV guide. Very interestingly, the new Master of Dark Shadows documentary about Dan Curtis and his productions, I think it's the Blu-ray, features that particular segment of that Dick Cavett show. So I'm remembering it just from 1,000 years ago, but that is what got my attention, and I just got into the show, and it was, I believe, in the middle of the Addams storyline, I think. I don't remember exactly. But I was waiting for that vampire, and he finally showed up, and I went, okay.
And what about yourself, Kathy? How did you first get introduced to Dark Shadows?
Well, this is going to be an entirely different sort of story, but I was raised in a rural working class town. I was 13 at the time. It was 1968. My friend Mary says, let's go on over to Julie's house. She just had a baby. Let's go see her baby. So over to Julie's house we went. Julie was 16 at the time, and she was we were chatting and visiting, and she says, we got to stop everything. I have to watch my show. And she turned on Dark Shadows, and Tom Jennings, the vampire, was one of the first characters I saw. And I thought, I love vampire stories. I've got to watch this show. So I wound up, when I was at home, saying to my mom, well, we got to watch this show. And she had been a fan of the early horror films, the original Dracula, Frankenstein, Bela Lugosi, all of that. So she loved it too. And eventually got my whole family into watching it. My father claimed he did not, but he kept his office door open while the show was on because he worked at home. And every once in a while, he would say, well, what's going to happen to Maggie? So we basically watched the whole show together.
Oh, excellent. And it seems like whilst you were watching it, who are your favorite characters? Let's start with you, Kathy. Who was your favorite character when you first started watching Dark Shadows?
Oh, Barnabas, definitely. Even though he wasn't even a vampire at the time, he still had this mystery to him, this gravity, even, just that fearful look he always had, which, as we know, partially came from not seeing the teleprompter. But I got this incredible sense of, the fish out of the water. I don't understand the world I'm working in, but I've got all these obstacles to deal with. He was kind of a hero at that time, fighting some supernatural creatures, helping others like Chris Jennings. And I like the whole dynamic around his character, Julia, Willie, of the Collins family of 1968.
And what about yourself, Marcy? Who's your favorite character of Dark Shadows?
I would say for me, it's more like the time period and what was going on in the different flashbacks or so on. And I was very drawn to the 1795 period. I just like the whole idea of, I've been watching, as I said, when Barnabas was already established. And I was very intrigued by how he got to be what he was, how he dealt with it, how others treated him, just the whole, empathy for his loneliness and for his feeling lost in this weird world and not knowing what to do, but yet still having to survive in this very, dangerous and unusual way that could have gotten him caught in trouble, in a moment. So I would say the time period, and then it just depended on what the different storylines were. Some of them are, especially with the actors playing different roles and so on. I thought that was very intriguing too. Mm-hmm. They referred to it with the, you look just like so-and-so once in a blue moon when they were passing back to present day, but then they stopped doing that so you could look at each character that they played as a unique person in that particular time period or that particular storyline. So I was kind of interested in all of it.
It's funny. It's funny because Kathy, you were mentioning about the Tom Jennings thing, which got you involved, and Don Briscoe, of course, played him. And I always thought that was the one chance that Julia Grayson Hall, of course, played her. I always thought that was the one chance that Julia finally had a little fun because
yes, something different.
because she was Tom's, but Tom decided that was the one for him. And after all these unrequited scenes with Barnabas, we finally got to see Julia smiling a little bit.
Very, very true.
Yeah. I just thought I'd throw that in. Okay.
Yeah, and Grayson was a very interesting person because I actually spent a day with her. But it was interesting to be with her.
What was it like? I'm just curious because, of course, Grayson never was able to go to the conventions. As you know, she got sick before,
Right.
really. And Jonathan, I understand, always used to say, gee, that would have been great if he and she could have been on the stage. They would have had a hoot, in Jonathan's own words. What was great? What was Grayson like, Marcy?
She was very interesting. She was. I was on the set of One Life to Live when she was on the show, and Sam, her husband, was writing for it. And she was very, very courteous to me and a couple other people who were there. And just I really enjoyed being with her. Of course, she had to go do the scenes and all that, so I didn't really get much chance to talk to her. But she was very welcoming and very happy to have, people on the set rather, who were there, because they enjoyed her work and everything. And she's a very interesting person. I'm sorry she's gone.
Me too.
She was my favorite, actually, on Dark Shadows. She was my favorite all-time character. Anything she did, I could watch her. But then, maybe it's the campness in me that quite enjoys her performance, because I even liked her, like, Night of the Iguana, and I've watched everything she's done since then. So it's good to know.
One of the things I think that the fans who can do impressions love to do, and there's Barney Bitch, that kind of, no, and then screaming, But one of the fans, David, does a spot-on impression of Grayson, and the fans every time.
Yes, he does.
Yeah, and the fans every time they hear it on Facebook, they're like saying, "Oh God, why can't you get a job with Big Finish, doing the audio dramas?" And they're not aware that being a voiceover artist, it's not just talent. It's a lot of other factors that have to be involved. It's a big change in the business, but anyway, Keith, you have something you were chiming in. Sorry if I interrupted you.
Oh, no, not at all. I'm just, I got Grayson Hall inside my head now, which is kind of scary.
Is she hypnotizing you?
Who has that amulet? I'll bet that was she was fake. She was
no
fake
idea.
Before it was long before it was fashionable in Dark Shadows. I tell you that, when she's playing Magda.
Oh gosh.
Oh, and that's another thing about. No, go ahead, Marcy.
I was going to say that was just one of the good things about the show, because they were able to do all these different time periods and keep a thread of the storyline, whether it was Barnabas or something like that you could do all these storylines in different time periods and different stories that still related to the basic, foundation of the series and of the family itself.
I think that's what makes Dark Shadows very unique, is and it must have been such a fantastic experience for the cast members, because normally, like, as we know, in daytime soaps, or we call it daytime dramas, depending on who wants to be offended or not, but they would, like, if you get one that's there and you go in and play a character, and you play that character until you decide to leave or till you die, sort of thing. But the thing about Dark Shadows, character every time you came on, and even if your character died in the same time zone, they'll bring you back as another character in the same time, which is quite unique. And I have to say, it must have been fantastic to be a script member and get be a cast and get your script and go, oh my God, I'm doing this, I'm doing this time period on this character. Now I can, now I'm going to do this other personality, and then, which to its credit, it foresees so many television shows that would not have been able to do that if Dark Shadows wasn't able to spin all that off at the moment.
Well, this is the idea of theater.
Exactly.
Yeah, Thayer David called it, or may rest in peace, called it a repertory company, and the kind of thing that really, and here the suits at ABC were saying, oh, no, that's not going to work. You can't have, they identify with one actor and one character, and now you're going to have the same actor doing another character. Never done, never been heard of. It isn't going to work. It isn't going to work. And Dark Shadows proved them all wrong. It worked, and it was endearing, and it really made it stand out.
I think it's also
Well, it also was,
carry on.
Go ahead.
It also was the fact that they had the different characters they could play, but it also had all these other elements to it, like the whole horror and the unrequited love and the time travel and everything. So there was all these other dimensions. There's always the saying that the housewives ironing and watching the soap opera, but Dark Shadows wasn't that way. So.
I had to sit there and say that when it comes to money men anyway, money men always lack imagination anyway. So, I think, and that's what, a tribute to Dan Curtis to have that imagination, to be someone who actually was able to produce and have the imagination to go along with it. And it's a credit to his race, actually. It's a credit to the man himself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when did you decide to start the Dark Shadows fan club? How did that come around?
Well, it was kind of thanks to Marvel comic books. I was a real comic book fan in the 60s and 70s, and around 1975, Marvel published a title called Vampire Tale. And back then, when people wrote letters to the editor, they published your full address. And I wrote a letter to the editor, and it was published, and I then got some letters in the mail from various other fans. Fan club pen pal things were a really big thing at the time, so that's why these addresses were published. Anyway, one of them, his name was Richard, it put me in contact with people who were still running various Dark Shadows fan clubs, plus a woman named Jean in San Diego, who would be also very crucial to the fandom. So I wrote to all the people who were still running fan clubs, and they were publishing newsletters. And within just a few short months after I subscribed to everything I could find, they all quit. And I thought, well, if I just got started with this, I'm just going to have to do it myself. And I started publishing a print fanzine called The World of Dark Shadows, starting in 1975 with the ancient dinosaur technology of a mimeograph machine. And the dinosaurs were helping her,
When dinosaurs ruled the earth. Yeah.
And so I published like a 20-page first issue, and I had advertised, I'd had the chance before these clubs closed to put an ad in all of them saying I was starting a new club/fanzine, and I got a few subscribers from there. And then with getting the letter in Vampire Tales put me in touch with other fans, and I contacted Jean, and she put me in touch with more fans. So slowly, from about 30 subscribers from the first issue, it just rose exponentially from there. And it was quite a trip. I did the fanzine from 1975 till 2001. And then Jean helped, organize the first ever Dark Shadows convention.
And thinking back to those old Rexograph machines, where I remember you had to watch out, or you'd get high from the alcohol as you'd.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. I could only type and use the machine for a short period of time, and I'd have to step away.
Well, when I was going to school, our punishment if we did anything bad was actually to do the mimeograph of the test and stuff like that. Yeah. And it was always in the broom closet, and so we'd go there and we'd come out like floating. So it was like, I'm not quite sure. It got to the point where we actually were some kids were actually getting in trouble on purpose just so they can go and get high off the alcohol.
Yeah,
as a teacher, I had to do the. As a teacher, I had to do the mimeographing myself, and you get the purple ink on your fingers and everything else. So,
God, those days.
Marcy still teaches first grade for all of our Dark Shadows fans that may or may not know that, and apparently was telling me that she gets the grandchildren now of some of these originals. So that's quite a nice thing. I think.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, I wanted to continue with about the Dark Shadows Club and how this all started. Was the woman Jean that I got in touch with in San Diego? She was running. She was heading a science fiction / cult movie convention called Equicon / FilmCon, and it was basically considered Comic Con. This was an early forerunner of the sort of events that became Comic Con. Just all kinds of different interests, all kinds of attendees, actors, writers, etc. So I went to her first event, and I really enjoyed it. And by the next year around, she and I had been talking about putting on a Dark Shadows event. And what she was getting involved with at that time was an event called StarCon, which was, again, a sort of smaller umbrella event that would allow a lot of various interest fan clubs, to come together under one roof and have, your own room for your own interest group. And so we began working on this, and I was able, to, get publicity through my own fanzine and other ones that were then a few began starting up again shortly after I began doing the World of Dark Shadows. Mm-hmm. And what happened then was I had gone to the next Equicon, which was held in Los Angeles instead of San Diego, and I'd put up a bulletin board, notice on the bulletin board saying, Dark Shadows fans, let's meet at a certain place and time. And quite a number of people showed up, including Marcy, and took down a lot of names and addresses of interested people, sent them information on what we were doing. And by the next year, 1977, StarCon happened that September, and we had our Dark Shadows event called ShadowCon with one guest, John Carlin.
Okay.
And Dark Shadows have been running in the Los Angeles area at that time. That's when we did the first kind of syndication of just the early episodes, and so there were fans who could see it. I remember at one point they had it up at like 11 o'clock at night, up against Mary Hartman. So or replaced by Mary Hartman. I don't remember anymore. But talk about juxtaposition. But anyway.
The convention that you did for Dark Shadows, what year was that?
1977.
And Kathy, was that the one you said John Carlin was a guest? Was that an actual convention, or was that more of a dinner? Because I've gotten two different stories.
It was a full weekend event as part of StarCon. We had a room for the entire weekend, as did the people who did gaming, as did the people who Logan's Run was a hot fandom at the time, but we all had our own room for the entire weekend. And we had some kinescopes of episodes, and we had to get a 16mm projector to show these on. But yeah, it was a full complete event.
And how did you meet John Carlin, by the way? How did he agree to do this?
This wasn't through me. Some of the people involved with the event had connections with some of the actors. For example, a woman named Janet, had contacts with Kathleen Scott. A woman named Barb had contact with John Carlin, and she was able to get Carlin to attend the first event.
This is like his pre-Cagney and Lacey days.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. But he did a lot of work. He did a lot of work after Shadows, of course, Daughters of Darkness, which is still regarded as a cult film. And he was and John Carlin, by the way, from my standpoint, one of the nicest actors in the fandom. Although there was something like that, but one of the nicest actors. When I met him at one of Kathy's cons, actually, one of the first ones I went to in California, it might have been '84. And he was at the bar, and and I grew up in Brooklyn, so I was at the bar, and John had and John was pleasant, was very pleasant after, and he came out, and I said, Mr. Carlin, my name is Tom Oates, and he goes, Tom, where do you come from? And I said, I come from Brooklyn. Tom, I was born in Brooklyn, and we Brooklyn guys together. What neighborhood you come from? And we went over that. I just thought he was so great. He really, and still is.
Yeah, he can be very, very, welcoming and just wonderful. You just want to talk to him about all kinds of stuff.
Yep.
How long did your convention last for in California? To what year?
Well, now this one was called ShadowCon. It ran for several years. 83, I think, 1983.
Okay.
And then we started the Dark Shadows Festivals in 84 with a one-day event in San Jose. We rented a meeting room at the Red Lion Hotel. And this was basically just a large gathering of fans, an all-day gathering. And I don't think that was there. No, that wasn't that one. And with the festivals, we also did a couple of combined events. One was a convention in San Jose called TimeCon, and their theme was any shows that involved time travel. There was a lot of Doctor Who presence there, and we, again, had our own room for the entire weekend. I think it was a few months after we did the original San Jose event, we did the first Newark, New Jersey event.
Okay.
And the Gateway Hilton in Newark, New Jersey. And of course, I lived in Brooklyn, so it was great for me to just go down there. And that was really where I met Kathy, I believe, I might have met her at there was a California thing that I went to that I saw her at, but I think the New Jersey ones were the ones that I remember the most, and I always felt very, very. It was like family. I always got that feeling, and you don't get that kind of feeling at other conventions and where you're like just you're just a number, and there are so many people and stuff like that. But I think it was the way Kathy and Marcy ran them. And of course, there's a lot going on behind the scenes, but I always, I always got the impression that, the fact that they cared, I think broke I think that came out in terms of, in terms of how well the conventions were run. Kathy, Marcy, I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of an insight into what goes on behind the scenes of creating the convention, the different departments, the running this stuff from the technical standpoint. How do you guys work in terms of putting everything together?
Well, as you can imagine, it's a massive amount of work just ahead of time, not just at the event itself. Just as first the negotiations with the hotel, the choosing the hotel, doing all the paperwork. And one of the people, Marcy and myself, and there was a third person involved with the festivals. Her name was Maria. And she had a contact out east named Anne, and they together arranged for the Newark Hotel, our first hotel out there. So hotel negotiations are a big deal. A lot of them involve having some kind of food event and a certain number of hotel rooms reserved. Your cost for the meeting space goes down, the more the hotel reservations go up. And so when you get to and then of course there's the mailings, keeping track of the membership, the registrations. All of these are massive tasks, and have been run and held by separate people throughout the years, working together, coordinating. And, all volunteers and all the volunteers who help at the events themselves are just invaluable. There's so much to be done at the event itself, watching the autograph lines, just keeping track of things, getting things for actors and so forth. And also the occasional AV equipment, which we just experienced, but we won't go there. But yeah, there's just a lot of jobs split up into different categories. Marcy can tell you more about, she was basically the guest coordinator. I did a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. I organized the dealer's room with the merchants, from various places selling things like, the NPI merchandise and so forth. And it's a huge topic. And I'm trying to figure out one thing to talk about first. So I think I'll let Marcy talk to the actors for a bit, and I'll think about what else I could add.
I became the guest liaison, the main guest liaison. I was helped by a lot of other people. That's one thing, too, about the festivals as well as the ShadowCons, especially the festivals. We had friends of ours from all over the country, again, because just corresponding, this is sometimes in the early days, obviously, it was before internet. So you do phone calls, you do letters, that sort of thing. But we had a lot of good friends who were just great to help us and, would help coordinate setting things up or help handle registrations or help, with, explaining things to people. I was working with the guests, and then I had some other people who helped. So if a guest, one of the actors or technical people, the staff, not the staff, but the behind the scenes people who we also would have at the festivals and conventions, whether they were sound people or whether they were the audio. That's right. That is audio. Writers. Anyway, writers, things like that. Our very first guest in New Jersey was Joe Caldwell, who was one of the writers. Ron Strode. Excuse me, Ron. I knew a lot of them. One of the reasons I knew a lot of them is because I was doing Shadowgram along with Maria, who was mentioned earlier. And we started Shadowgram in 1977, and it was a print postal mail newsletter that I get all kinds of information from the different Dark Shadows personnel, from fans, stuff like that, where we would just do like newsletter reporting what people were doing as far as the cast or news coverage related to Dark Shadows or related to the genre, anything that would be relevant. Like that. The places where the filming was done, whether it was the studio, whether it was the houses like Lyndhurst or Seaview, which we use as the homes, all that sort of thing. And because of that, I was in touch with a lot of the cast members and the crew members personally, by mail and so on, and worked with them when they would come to the conventions. I'd be their guest escort along with some other people who were good at it as well. And I just got to know them and, escort them around the facilities at the convention when they had to be on stage or off stage. People like Joan Bennett, people like Jonathan Fridge, people, all the people we've had at the festivals. And even the early ShadowCons, like Kathy said, going back to John Carlin in our first one. So in that sense, it's all volunteer. We everything we do, we have to handle it ourselves, whatever. And we have great friends and great volunteers who help us too. And that's the best part about something like a convention like this, because it is fan oriented, of course, and encourages the guests and the fans to interact and enjoy each other. But it's all done together, and that just keeps it going as a big Dark Shadows family, I guess.
Yeah, we would have dozens of volunteers. We had a volunteer coordinator. We had people who were in charge of making sure the autograph lines were going. We would have people in charge of security. We would have so many different categories, but dozens of volunteers. And like she said, we're all volunteers, but dozens of volunteers helping with each particular category.
I think you just hit upon, by the way, the once again, the idea of the fans interacting with the stars. And I don't, one of the things about the conventions, and I don't know whether this was started with you or with Jim Pearson, who took it over after you guys. And Jim, of course, has held the glue together with the conventions for many years after that. But the dinners, I always thought were really great. I don't know if you started that or with Jim, but for those fans who haven't attended the conventions or never got to, they would have the last night of the convention on the weekend, usually Sunday night, they would have a dinner, and they would depending on how many stars attended, they would try to sit a star at each table, or at certain tables. I think in the beginning it was a dais kind of thing, but then they got and that was a real treat for me to be able to sit with a star and talk to them, and it was a very, very intimate setup. And this is when you think of conventions in other genres where the security are involved in keeping the fans away from the stars, and it's got to be controlled and blah blah blah. This was a very different experience for me, and a much more positive one.
Yeah, we would encourage the fans to interact with the guests as much as possible, and the fans, of course, were very happy with that. Sometimes you have to kind of go, okay, there's other people in line, but you can understand when fans get so excited. Oh my gosh, that's Barnabas. Oh my gosh, that's
sure.
Angelina. That kind of thing. And that's understandable.
Yeah, we did do the dinners early on. that turned out to be a very good thing. It was part of the hotel negotiations. Always, you need a food event. And so we started the idea of the banquet, and then, the idea of having an actor at each table became an organic part of it, a way for, people to actually have closer interaction with the guests in a less formal setting, really. Just a nice chance just to chat. And of course, it grew to the point where there was not enough guests to sit at each table. So one of the things we tried to make certain of is no one ahead of time was informed which actor was going to be at which table, because we wanted to make people have essentially an equal opportunity to choose a table. And whoever would be at that table, they would be brought in later. So it would be a surprise to whoever was at that particular table.
We would go in the banquet room before the fans could come in, obviously, and we put down masking tape strips on the chairs to mark that this was where a guest was sitting. If the guest happened to have a, spouse or, something like that, we would put tape down for 2 seats at that table. But that was the only way fans would know that, look for a taped chair, and that means someone's supposed to be sitting there. But they had no idea who it was. And we had the guests, I'd escort the guests in, or some of the people who are helping me with the guests. We would escort them in, and they go, "Oh, look, there's so-and-so." And they're like, "Are they coming here?" You could see the excitement, but it was all random in that sense. So it wasn't a case of, "I'm going to sit with so-and-so and you're not," which people might do. Because it was just luck of the draw. And it seemed to work well. And the guests were very amiable about it. If they had spouses with them or whatever, they're usually very, very amiable about it.
It worked great. It worked great. And my personal recollection that the year I sat with Diana Malay, who of course was Laura Collins, and in two times in the Phoenix, and she was Laura in both the beginning of the show and in the 1897 when they brought her back, and I was single at the time, and she was giving me a big lecture about why don't you get married, and. That was so. She was my.
We were.
So she was my Jewish mother for the evening, and I wanted Laura. I can't tell you something. I can't get married yet. I'm looking for a nice girl. That kind of thing. That's my grandmother. But it was, but I still remember that. I mean, that was a very, and the fans, this in that kind of a setting, it was you were having like a one-on-one. And my other recollection is at one of your conventions, I won the raffle, and I think that was, and I got to have dinner with Jonathan in Santa Monica. I think that was one of your conventions on Sunday for brunch. And that was also a great experience because he was, and I always say this, he was very intelligent and could speak to a variety of topics. He was a heck of a conversationalist, and he could really tell you. Yeah. So, so that's why, so that was kind of the thing that I got the impression that what you guys did really went above and beyond, whereas some of these other conventions would not. I don't know of any other convention, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know of any other convention that ever had a dinner set up like that, where you could mingle with the stars that way.
I can think of maybe a couple back in the 80s when conventions were mostly fan run, but the big corporations kind of took over, and then they started treating, attendees like it's a cattle call. You have to be herded here and herded there.
You brought up an excellent point. Go ahead.
Yeah, not really good. Yeah, all those professional conventions came, after the fan run conventions, because obviously fans would be the ones who would be in touch with each other, and then someone kind of went, let's put on a show, and it worked out that they could do that with, all the cooperation, all the paperwork or whatever was involved, then that was still like a family feeling, and that's the best kind of event to have, because you already have the common interest.
And then people in certain organizations decide they could monetize this, and, you've been to those events, and so have I.
Yep. Sadly.
Yep. And it's a shame. It really is a shame because, in my humble opinion, they're not putting the wool over anybody's eyes. When fans can see the difference between a convention that is set up where where everybody can schmooze, in a relatively in a relatively reasonable setting, versus okay, get in line, and you can talk to them for 10 seconds, and then we got to move it along, and that kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth. But you guys you guys did it right. You guys did it right.
Well, thank you very much. It does happen though when you get a lot of people in line, and we have our guests, tables in a row in a hallway or in a room or whatever. They can go around, or they can go to certain tables to get so and so's autograph, whatever. It's just the sheer number of people, and so we try our best to keep the lines moving, and it's understandable people want to stand and talk to the guest, or the guest is interested in what the fans are saying or asking about. I mean, that's human nature, and that's just interactions with other people.
The logistics definitely got more complicated the larger we grew.
Yeah.
When we started out with a few hundred, and then it went over 3,000. That's a massive change, and it's a massive change in how you handle things at an event.
And we often had lots of guests too. Whether it's the actors, whether it's the technical people. We'd have up to a dozen or even more of the different guests. Maybe they'd come on different days or different times they'd be able to be there, but still fans would say, "Oh, there's so and so. He's not going to be here tomorrow. I want to go see him." That kind of thing. So it wasn't a lot of logistics, just physically moving everything.
Did you find it quite surprising?
Keep in mind also.
Sorry.
What?
No,
go ahead.
I just wanted to add on something earlier. Keep in mind that also Marcy and I have always been involved with the festival. We never left the main staff. Maria ran the Dark Shadows Festival for 3 years, and then she stepped down, and Jim Pearson, that's when he took over.
And we were there with Jim. We helped him from the very beginning, and we still work with him. We're still doing a lot of stuff with him through Shadowgram, through publicity, things like that. And Shadowgram now is online. That's the Shadowgram Yahoo group, where I release the official Dark Shadows news updates. It's free. But anyway, so yeah, Jim, we've worked with Jim very much. We know him very well, a lot of different capacities. And, he's done a lot. He's obviously had to pick up doing more than we ever did.
And he started out as a fan attending the festival.
And he then started working for Dan Curtis Productions. And he was very, very, and still is, very, very involved with Dan Curtis's properties and so on. And when Dan died, all of a sudden he had picked up some of the stuff for Dark Shadows, and he's been doing it all along, and he's very good at it, and he does it along with a lot of other jobs that he does. He's a producer of all kinds of films and documentaries, often in the entertainment field, and that sort of thing. So he's an amazing person too.
Did you find it quite surprising that the cast and crew of Dark Shadows were so amenable to the fans, considering that a lot of TV show actors, once the show finishes, they're like, done, dusted, I moved on, that's part of the past. But it seems like the Dark Shadows cast and crew seem to be a lot more amenable than any other television show, being more involved with the fans, and as you said, being very hands-on during these conventions. Was that a bit of a surprise for you?
I think what happened was there was a little bit of hesitation at first, like, what is this anyway? But because we did our best to create a real family feeling, a real friendly feeling and relaxed feeling at these events, it got them the chance to understand fans as people, not as people out in an audience, but actual individual people. Additionally, it also has given them a lot of opportunities to reunite with each other. There's been a lot of comments I've heard about, them just having a chance to visit with, their co-workers, at these events, which they have enjoyed. So I think it's just been basically entirely because we took a different approach from the beginning from other events.
Right.
I'm not saying all other events. I know there are other fan clubs for specific shows that have done similar things. I'm afraid I can't remember the specific, but one fan club for a 1960s Western, carried on their event for many, many years. And I understand it had the same sort of feel to it. But this is when you have fans running these things, who experienced fans running these things, who can carry on something year after year. And that gives everyone, both actors and fans alike, really good chances to know each other.
Yeah, and they get relaxed. They know the situation. It's not, okay, here, quick, get your autograph, move along. Even when we have lots of people in line, we try as much as possible to let everybody have a chance to talk and just take a picture with someone. And the stars and guests are very accommodating on the whole, unless something is coming up, of course. So like we have to get them up on stage for a talk. And that's another thing too. They do a lot of audience Q&A when they're on stage. We have our guests up on stage together, and fans can come up to a microphone in the middle of the seating area and ask a question or make a comment. And the stars are very amiable about answering, or, going, oh, I remember that kind of thing. So again, even the guests get very, very relaxed. And having known them for all these years and working with them all these years, it's good for them and it's good for the fans too.
It's really nice of the guests to do that, because some of the fans unfortunately don't realize that the guests have been away from Shadows for a long time. So that when you get somebody that asks a question, well, Jonathan, in episode 868, when you were talking with Angelique, and you said this or that, and why did you say it that way? And I always, and that does take patience, from another standpoint, because unless you're really, and there are stars that are trivia nuts, but obviously the stars have other lives, and I think that in general they handled that pretty well. They were able to understand that these were not, unlike the Star Trek fan. There was a lampoon on Saturday Night Live, the famous one of the Star Trek fandom by William Shatner, and
that was actually also a send-up of the guys who run Creation Con,
which was one of the first big professional conventions, like we talk about that.
Anybody who's familiar with Creation Con recognized the two guys running that convention in that skit immediately.
Yeah, and there are variations of Creation Con still around.
But I think a lot of Star Trek fans, and of course we're digressing, but a lot of the Star Trek fans were upset by that thing where Shatner was the get a life speech, and and your parent, and John Lovitz is playing. John Lovitz is playing a Spock with the ears, and Shatner says, "When was the last time you ever made love to a girl? Are you still living in your parents' basement?" That kind of thing. And that was
there was that old cliche.
Yeah, living in the basement.
Yeah, living in the basement. Go ahead.
It's interesting because, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
It's interesting because when being the guest liaison, and when I was bringing them up on stage for the large group talks, and they'd be answering questions and so on. I remember escorting Joan Bennett, rest in peace, but she was a neat lady. A lot of them were very neat people. But anyway, escorting her around, and she was up on stage, and her husband, David Wilde, was sitting, in the front row. We'd squeeze the seat in, and I was sitting actually between his legs because there are no seats in that room for me to sit in. And I was there because he wanted me to make sure she was okay if anything came along. She's already getting up there. But fans would ask her, that kind of question in episode number such and such, and you could just see her kind of like, not so much that she was, forgetting, was like, how could I remember something like that, And yet you understand where fans are coming from, because a lot of times they come up to a star at the table and they go, Angelique, or Josette, I just love when you did this and this, and you can understand how they relate to the character. And when I get all the mail when I was doing Shadowgram and just when we were working with the convention and all this, people would say, I can't wait to meet Barnabas, or I can't wait to go get an autograph and a picture with, Quentin, or whatever it was. And we worked with a lot of the stars in a lot of different capacities outside of the convention, helping them with their projects, helping them with publicity for their events, or their, if they're in a movie, whatever it was, helping them with their books and so on, helping sell David Selby's things and Kathleen Scott's things. But that was just because, we were there to help, and they knew us, and that was fine. But it's just part of being the whole fanish community, as we were talking about.
Well, it kind of also, you could see the love, quote unquote, that was going around. I remember, and I don't know if this was your convention or Jim's already, but Joan Bennett was in a wheelchair, and there there were steps leading up to the dais, and there was no way that they were going to be able to get her up. And Roger Davis, who's on the stage, ran up and carried her to her seat, and that was a poignant moment. That was a poignant moment.
Yeah. Just things like that go back, and you can see the way they interacted together, not only, while on the show, but also just knowing each other all those years. And now here they are reunited again and bringing back the memories and connections with the world.
And probably as surprised as anybody that the fans were still interested in this show after all these years. Because it was something, I think, if Dan Curtis, may rest in peace, was still alive, I mean, he knew about the fans, but the idea that, because at the time the show was on, and I said it before, when the bloopers were occurring, and the stars were begging Dan Curtis to let him do it over, and he says, "Are you kidding? Nobody's going to remember that. These are housewives, and you think they're going to remember bloopers? I mean, don't even worry about that." But the bloopers actually became one of the most endearing things about the show, and which is, of course, talked on over and over again. But that's this whole thing, this question of family.
Hello, welcome back to Literary License Podcast, Dark Shadows, episodes 92 to 113. So, Tom, what are your final thoughts? Oh, wait, before we get there, let's do our character breaks. So, Vicky, sorry, getting ahead of myself. Vicky, what's your favorite character of these episodes, and who's your least favorite character, and why?
Well, I would have to say Roger gets it. Louis Edmonds again. I just think he's so obnoxious. I just can't get enough of Roger. I love him to death. I mean, just his one-liners, how he calls Sam Evans or whatever. Are you sober, Evans? It's just the way he gets all after him. And he just how he talks, and any fan knows, Louis Edmonds. He just brings this character across so well, and I just adore him in these episodes because he just cracks me up. And I'd have to say the least favorite one, I was getting really annoyed with Carolyn whining about Burke. It's just like, forget Burke,
Yeah.
It just, and I'm kind of glad because I know I've seen other episodes and we lead into the future. They finally utilize her good acting skills, and she, she really does move on brilliantly in episodes yet to come. But I just, and the fact that Burke does treat her like a little girl, and she gets really pissed off that people treat her like a little girl, because who wants to be treated that way? She wants to sit at the big person's table. But those are my picks. What about y'all?
What about yourself, Tom? Who's your favorite and who's your least favorite of these episodes?
What was that? Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so what does that sound?
Who's your favorite character and who's your least favorite character?
Thank you, Keith. Okay, so I at first was going to say Kennard Fox because I really liked the developing relationship. He was such a breath of fresh air. I mean, the rest of the family was banging their heads against the wall, and here's this nice young guy that immediately gives Vicky the full court press and wants to take her out to dinner and really just wants to have a nice relationship with her and a
Get her
nice
the
life.
hell out of that house.
And oh my God, and you know, and that was going to be my favorite, and he's certainly up there. But then Thayer David did it for him. He took over as Matthew, and he literally busted the scene. I mean, you really, for the first, up to this point, he's just carrying around toolkits and, and just, want the door fixed, Mrs. Stoddard, got to put a bolt inside bolt. And that was basically, but now, when the whole thing comes out, and especially, and I do have to give Alexandra Moltke honorable mention, because the scenes between and of course, no, not to spoil it, but you're going to see more of that later in other episodes. But it's a great tension between them, and so I would say Thayer David would be my favorite. For the worst, I would agree with you, Vicky, about Carolyn. I am getting sick and tired of seeing her whine this way. It's enough. It's old. It's just becoming painful.
Jealousy, nitpicky shit. It's just like, can we move on, please?
Come on, Joe. Come on, go. Oh, Joe, I'd like to be with you, Joe. And but I'm running to Burke the first chance I get. And she's just such a twit.
Wasn't it great to see Joe finally grow a pair, though?
It's getting there.
But he does grow a pair, people.
Yeah. And did you see poor Maggie's face when they were at dinner, and then I think it was in this block when she realizes she comes in with her father and sees Joe and Carolyn at dinner. Did you see poor Catherine Lake Scott did that so well?
I know the disappointment in her face was she did carry that off really good.
But then when they had the fight and Joe ran and then Carolyn ran off, and you see Maggie and you see the face like,
perks right up.
Something good happened.
Yeah, but then Joe comes back and her face just lights up.
Absolutely, and then they start with the little jibs and jabs and the sail thing again. I think they have a reprise of that memorable scene of how many topsails are in the thing. But yes, Carolyn, I did not like Carolyn here. I'm getting tired of it.
And for myself, Conrad Fox is quite funny that you mention him, because I always think that he lives at Wayne Manor. He looks like Adam West to me. I don't know what it is.
Yes. Oh my God, yes.
And I was like, oh, he's won't be long until Batman shows up to save the day for help to get Vicky out there. But no, in all seriousness, my favorite character it's got to be Roger. I think I want to go to the Roger School of Empathy.
No kidding.
I just love Rogers.
I love him. He doesn't give a shit about anybody. He just
and when I was watching these episodes, and I was thinking about honorable, that kind of thing, about who I would pick for my favorite character. And I think what does it for me is when Roger comes in and when he sits there and goes, Vicky's almost been murdered, she almost dies, and he's like, well, I've been to jail. It's like, and he gives her this look like, who cares about you? Look what you've done to me, woman. I don't care. It's like she could have been chopped up in pieces, and he would just step over and goes, this bitch sent me to jail. And it was just after that moment, it's like I loved it.
I think
my least favorite character has to be, I have to go with Carolyn. They got to do something with that character because she is so one-dimensional. You need more facets with her and stuff like this. And Tom, I will agree with you about Victoria Winters. It's good to see that all of a sudden this character is starting to be more fleshed out. I'm quite liking that.
Right.
I would have liked to seen a bit more Maggie a little bit, because there's something about the Joe and Maggie relationship that seems right. It didn't seem right with Joe and Carolyn for me. It always seemed a bit this odd relationship, but there is some chemistry with them, and it was good to see more of that.
Was it this block of episodes that she starts shooting up all that information about boats?
No, that was
show?
that was last podcast.
That was last time, but there's a reprisal very briefly.
Yeah, they do reprise.
When they start talking again in the Blue Whale and trying to get to after Joe comes back from the fight that he had with Carolyn and Sam has disappeared for some reason. I don't remember where he went.
Sleeping it off.
He's at the Blue Whale. He's at the Blue Whale.
He's in the back room. He's in the back room. Ask what the boys in the back room will have. And so she's so they start talking.
I'm never quite sure where when you get to Maggie's house where exactly these bedrooms are because I don't know. It's kind of hard to figure out the layout of her house.
One bedroom. And one of the big bloopers, by the way, is if you look at Maggie's house in the exterior, it looks like a 2-story.
Yeah, it does.
But there's only one floor when you go into that house. There's no steps. So so that was
there's no lock on the door either.
Yeah, clearly.
Well,
that's all you need to put in your bloopers. Every time they go through, they're putting. You always see like Sam or someone like that with their key. But the thing is, there is no lock in that to put your key in anywhere. It's just a doorknob.
Well, maybe they're trying to be like Club Med, you don't need locks to enter the doors or something like that.
Mime class 101. Let's pretend there's no lock in the door.
But it's just stuff like that makes it more endearing. The show, it really does.
Yes.
So now we come to our morning is broken. So Tom, what are your final thoughts of these episodes?
It's a crescendo, building up to the finding out who finally murdered Bill Malloy. There are some slow segments for a little while, and of course Ron Sprode is now getting his hand into the mix, and he does some pretty good writing, dabbling once again with Josette's ghost in that one scene. I still love the exteriors because you're not going to see those later on. And I think that I think that we're now finally coming to a resolution of the murder mystery, but there's still more to come. But definitely a pickup during the latter half of the block, which is a good thing to see.
And what about yourself, Vicky? Your final thoughts?
I was just thinking we were talking about is that Josette dancing around the outside of the house and into the forest, stuff like that.
That was in an earlier block.
That was in the earlier. Okay.
Yeah.
But no, I'm glad to see all the threads starting to come together, and it looks like we're going to get some of this wrapped up because after a while, when something just carries on so long, you really, really want to see what's coming next. And I'm really enjoying where I am right now with the show because it's really interesting. But I'm glad to see, like you said, Victoria, she's finally, we know she has a brain, even though she's a little snoop, but it's nice to see these characters finally starting to, come of their own.
Oh, one more point. You got to give Sheriff Patterson a lot of credit. The case was officially closed because of the 30-day autopsy. And
30-day autopsy.
And he still said, well, no, I never closed it. I'm still looking around. I know what I'm doing. So he's an investigator after all. He's going to buck the judge. He's going to buck all of them. He's not putting anything away, even if he gets fired. Well, good for you, Sheriff Patterson. Good for you.
I think he's an underrated actor in the show too. I think
terrific. He's terrific.
Yeah, he's great.
Oh, no. Well, he was just starting out then, but remember, Dana Elcar went on to do a lot of things.
Yes, he did.
And I liked him in an earlier block. I said he was the best. When he first came on, I thought he was the best thing that happened, that really happened to the show, especially after the first one, Jonas Carter, who was kind of more intellectual. And Jonas Carter knew what he was doing.
He did look like an accountant.
And look, Sheriff Patterson is more plotting. With that phone call at 10:30, they were plotting, Ploddi.
Oh, plotting, okay.
Plotting. I said plotting.
That's what I thought you said.
There's my Brooklyn accent, plotting.
Maybe so.
the call at 10:30. Why the heck didn't he just call the phone company to verify the time of the call instead of running around getting all these statements from witnesses as to when the call came in?
He did make it hard on himself, didn't he?
He made it terribly hard on himself. He's a mediocre investigator, but he came through. I don't want to listen to any of these guys. He came through.
And my final thoughts of these episodes, I think that the beginning, the early part of the, between 92 to, let's say, 104 episodes, that mark, I think it was quite slow going. There's some interesting parts in it, but it's creaking as much as the doors of the old house, I think, as far as the plot is concerned. But now, but we do get that speed up that we get at the end of this, up until 113, which I think it makes it a bit more interesting. But I do like some of the character development that we're receiving. I do like some of the new characters that they've introduced. I like, Frank and his father. I like that they're bringing their own. And I love the, getting Mrs. Johnson and have her more part of the plot and not just,
I really enjoy her character.
I do feel like we do get kind of a Sam and Maggie and Joe. They're kind of like on the outside of it because they're not really based in the house. But I do know, that's going to change very, very soon for all of us. So. But I have to say that I do like this, and I kind of like the Jessica Fletcher, Victoria Winters that we have going at the moment. Though, between you and me and Murder, She Wrote, Jessica Fletcher is a serial killer. I'm sorry, wherever she goes, people died. And this is kind of what Vicky's doing. Wherever Vicky shows up, there's death or there's something bad going on.
Yeah, they are the princesses of darkness.
Yeah, badness goes wherever Vicky goes. So I am enjoying this, actually. And I have to sit there and say that when we come back next week for Dark Shadows episodes 114 and 135, this is when things start getting really exciting. So, well, that brings us to the end of the Literary License Podcast, Dark Shadows, episodes 92 to 113. Make sure you tune with us next week because we're doing an extra Dark Shadows, as I said before, for episodes 114 to 135. And until then, make sure you follow us on our social media, which includes Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and we're also on Tumblr. And of course, if you're listening to us, you're finding us on your own platform, but make sure that we're on other platforms like Spreaker, Podbean, iHeartRadio, Cashbox Radio, and YouTube. So make sure, if you want to, and you find that your podcast provider, you want to try another podcast provider, we're on plenty of those as well. And also make sure you join up with our newsletter at www.llpodcast.com and sign up with our newsletter because in February, March, we'll be starting to give away some freebies to all our listeners. All you need to do is enter some of the competitions, which you'll only be able to get through our newsletter. So that brings us up to the end of our Dark Shadows episodes for this week, and we shall say adieu to everyone out there. So say goodbye, Tom.
Goodbye, everybody, and have a great Thanksgiving. I bet it's anticipated, but have a great Thanksgiving in advance.
And good night, Vicki.
Good night, and everybody have a good start to the holiday season.
And if you're out there celebrating Thanksgiving in America, I think you should do what the natives did. Take someone's land, make sure they feed you, and then kill them. Until that time, have a pleasant good night.
Do you mean that?
Of course. I've always envied people like that. Oh, you know me. I had it handed to me. Born with a silver spoon in my mouth, all that kind of thing.
It doesn't show.
Doesn't, huh? I think that statement has made me happier than any I've heard since I passed the bar exam.
Your sandwich, sir?
Huh? Oh, thank you.
have a dream come true. Let's talk about the star, looking like a toy, peeking through the branches of a tree. Talk about the girl, talk about the boy, counting all the ripples on the sea. Happy talking, happy talk. Talk about things you'd like to do. You got to have a dream. If you don't have a dream, how you gonna make a dream come true? All right. Talk about the boy saying to the girl, golly baby, I'm a lucky cuss. Talk about the girl saying to the boy, you and me are lucky to be us. Happy talking, happy talk. Talk about things you'd like to do. You got to have a dream. If you don't have a dream, how you gonna make a dream come true? And if you don't talk happy and you never have a dream, then you'll never have a dream come true.
Believe me, Vicky, I'm going to dig until I come up with some sort of answer. I'm going to do everything in the world I can to help you.